my name is Brandon Reed. I serve as the public historian here at the International African American Museum. I'd like to thank you all for coming out. Thank you to our virtual attendees as well who have decided to tune in on this Thursday night for an amazing conversation and program. And many thanks to our panelists and moderator right behind me. I'm not going to speak too much because there's a lot of knowledge and talent on this stage. And so I know they are the stars and y'all can't see them. But I did want to take a moment to sort of provide some level setting for this conversation. We're here at the International African American Museum. We've been here before, you know our mission is to honor untold stories. And so what we strive to do here is to make sure, as we think about these different events and these different conversations that are being had about American history, about our international history as well, we really strive to focus on these major movements, but also these individual and some might consider untold stories even within them. And so we're very excited for our conversation tonight, for tonight's program, celebrating the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act, honoring 60 years of resilience. Tonight, we honor the tireless efforts of those who fought for civil rights and social justice, but we also honor those whose names are widely known, and also those stories that may not be as well known, but the sacrifices and the journey of those individuals are just as important. It was important for us to be able to host this conversation at the museum as we continue to find ways to make sure our content is as accessible as possible. And so even those who might have registered early on, you may have noticed that we made the decision intentionally to make this a free program. Because given the current political situation and climate, we want to make sure that conversations such as these are accessible to everyone, regardless of any different boundaries or barriers that may be coming into place. And so my hope is that tonight, perhaps as we reflect on the history and significance of the Civil Rights Act and the efforts of the many to support the civil rights and equality for all, each of you will be inspired towards thought and action as we continue to carry this legacy forward. And so again, I'm very grateful to be able to have this amazing panel behind me, Dr. Benjamin Chavis, Cecil Williams, and our moderator, Bennett. All of them have been such gracious friends of the museum, and we are so excited to have them tonight. I remember I met Mr. Bennett earlier this year at our program as we were celebrating and bringing in Dr. Rex Kennedy for a conversation on his newest piece. And so we ended up speaking in the parking lot after the program for probably a little bit longer. I probably held him up at least additional 15 to 20 minutes. And all I kept thinking was, this is such an amazing and knowledgeable individual, and I couldn't wait for us to find ways to be able to partner and to collaborate and to bring him into the fold. And so I'm very happy to have Mr. Bennett, Charlestonian native, a retired Army officer, and the historian for the Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church here tonight to serve as our moderator. So can we have a round of applause?
I guess we're ready. Good evening. Again, my name is Lee Bennett Jr., and I'm pleased to be the moderator here this evening as we open a discussion to hear from two iconic men, Dr. Benjamin Franklin Chavis Jr. and Mr. Cecil Williams. Dr. Benjamin Chavis, activist, author, journalist, and current president of the National Publishers Association, and Mr. Cecil Williams, an American photographer, publisher, author, and inventor whose photographs documents the civil rights movement in South Carolina beginning in the 1950s. He's also the owner and founder of the only civil rights museum in South Carolina. That's outstanding. So we have so much to unpack. But we have to start our conversation somewhere in the short period of time that we have. So we're going to get right to it. Now, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was the first important civil rights legislation since the Civil Rights Act of 1875. President Lyndon Johnson signed into law on July the 2nd, 1964. Now, on paper, the Civil Rights Act would mean that discrimination based on race was illegal. But there was a tremendous groundswell and feeling that now that the law was passed, everything was all right. If black folks would just work harder, get an education, they would be fine. Some white folks felt that they were the ones that were being discriminated against. So my question to you as we start this evening, what is your view on those early sentiments by some in 1964? And do you think that those sentiments of 1964 are shared by many in 2024? In fact, are we stepping backwards?
Thank you very much for allowing us to be here. I'm always honored to be in the presence of my fellow colleagues in the civil rights movement. Charleston, South Carolina is a very important place in the history of our people. So I'm going to answer your question like this. I don't think we are trekking backwards, walking backwards. I don't think we're moonwalking. What I think is happening is that there are forces that are trying to take us back. There are forces that are trying to dismantle what we achieved in the 1960s. And parenthetically, let me just say, we were able to achieve what we did in the 1960s because of what happened in the 1950s, 1940s, 1930s, 1920s. And I would be so bold to say that it goes all the way back to what we achieved prior to the American independence. African Americans have fought for the freedom of all Americans. Died, bled, lynched, terrorized, and what happened at Mother Emanuel was not isolated from the history of terror. And what is the purpose of the terror? It is to, first, to make us afraid so we won't fight for freedom, justice, and equality. But it's not just fear. It is to make us think from a theological perspective that given all of what we've been through, we must be a cursed people rather than a blessed people. And so I come tonight to affirm that we are a blessed people. And that African history, African American history, Black history is really American history. It's global history. It's the history of humanity. So yes, there are these forces that are trying to take us backward. There are these forces that are trying to even change our narrative, burn the books. The governor of Florida, I really don't even think his name is DeSantis. I think it's DeSatanist. And so, because it's evil. I think that when you try to deny any human being their God-given right to have life without discrimination, without the fear that is institutionalized or socialized or politicized. I do want to say though, and then I'll pass it on to my brother here, the 1964 Civil Rights Act was only made law because not only our activism in the civil rights movement, but we got a group of Republicans and Democrats to work together. And Lord knows that's not happening today. Republicans hate Democrats, Democrats hate Republicans. Black folks, we get caught up in the middle, trying to moderate. People give Lyndon Johnson credit for signing the Civil Rights Act, but it was Senator Everett Dirksen, a Republican from Illinois, that mobilized the Republicans to join with the Democrats to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was a historic matter. In 1964, I was working for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I was a youth coordinator for SCLC. I was born in 1948. I started working in the civil rights movement when I was about 11 or 12 years old. By the time I was 14, I was actually working in the movement. When I say working in the movement, that doesn't mean you get a salary in the movement. I put my age up. That's a whole nother story. I was driving, having mobility, and I also became a part-time labor organizer for ASFN, the American Federation of State County Municipal Employees, in Charlotte, North Carolina, because we had a strike very similar to the strike in Memphis. But I'll pause there. So, no, we're not walking backwards or trekking backwards, but we are facing some headwinds right now in 2024. And hopefully, before we leave here, we will talk about Project 2025, which is a 900-page document that, again, is trying to dismantle, trying to institutionalize, trying to make communities of color feel like there is something wrong, something innately wrong with us, rather than the institutionalized evils and racism that are going on. So to me, this discussion that we're having here in Charleston, South Carolina, I can't think of a better place to have this discussion than Charleston. Given the history of Charleston, and the evolution of American society, in particular, the evolution of Black America.
Mr. Williams.
Good evening, Charleston from Orangeburg. Anytime the International African American Museum invites me down, I am so thrilled to really be a part of what they are doing and what we are doing here in Charleston in this magnificent facility we're in. And I want to thank the audience also for being here tonight, because you could have been anywhere, but you chose to be here. So thank you for letting us share some of our experiences and some of the things that we are thinking about this great moment in time when America transitioned from that of a segregated society to that of an integrated society. I also want to recognize, before I go any further, Ms. Marva Gay. Would you stand up? Whenever I see someone from the media, she's again on the New York Times editorial board. Whenever I see the media, I have such great respect for the media, because my comment is this: I really believe that we are not moving backwards. I really believe there's been a lot of progress. I believe there's a myth that we're moving backwards. But what happens? The power of the press and the power of getting things out is so remarkable today. I have my cell phone in my jacket here, but that miracle we can put in our pocket. So I've always believed all of my life that there has always been more good people than there are bad people, and people who are going and care about each other, people who, I mean all races, good people on both sides, and it's in the majority as well. And so I think that there's a myth of the fact that that things are getting worse, but I believe that the capacity for the press to carry the stories of the minority has gained in time, therefore giving rise to the fact that perhaps things are worse. In covering the civil rights era as a photographer for Jet magazine, I remember the times when I went around the state of South Carolina taking events of things that were going on. And one of the events that I also would like to call your attention to is I had the great pleasure of one time photographing Dr. Chavis, the great attorney from the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall. And for a young man, I think I was around, the first time I met Thurgood Marshall in photograph, I was around 13 or 14. And then after he won the Brown versus Board of Education decision before the Supreme Court, he came to Charleston, he came to Clarendon County, he came to Orangeburg, and he came to Columbia. And I happened to photograph him again. And I remember him telling this story to me as I rode around in the car with this greater than, I mean, you know, the reality of this famous person. was such a great mind, a great legal maverick, who again handled that case marvelously. But here's something he told me. He said that during the trial of Brown versus Board of Education, and I always remind audiences that the first case was the Briggs versus Eddie case of Clarendon County, 30 miles, and I tell that in my stories. But he tells me this story. He said John Davis, who had won 150 cases before the United States Supreme Court, asked Thurgood Marshall, said, Thurgood, if you were to win this case, how long do you think it would take in America before this is a colorblind society? Now this was close to May 17th, 1954, when John Davis asked Thurgood Marshall that question. How long do you think? Again, that's May 17, 1954. Thurgood Marshall said he thought it would really be 100 years. If that is so, even though I said there's still a majority of good people, but for it to be a complete revolution where the majority, and they're a very, very small minority, a colorblind society, I'm almost thinking that it would be that Thurgood Marshall was not wrong, because it would be 2054 before we have a colorblind society, perhaps, as things are going. So that's my take on it. I think that there has been progress. But one thing you cannot do, President Johnson in the United States Congress, as a backlash to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy, actually a Southerner, President Johnson really was inspired, because as you may know, President Johnson was a former segregationist. But because of the inspiration of a great president like President John F. Kennedy, who I also photographed, who also rode in his 10-seater airplane from Columbia to Atlanta, and one of the greatest persons I've ever really had a chance to photograph and be with. There have been so many events that influence things and influence not only in the legislature, but gets down to and affects the people in everyday life. I have learned that you cannot, and come to understand, you cannot legislate morality. It has to be something that comes from within. It has to be genuine, the soul. But I conclude my remarks by saying that I really believe we have had great progress, and I'm hoping that I can live longer to where some of the negative things that are going on in this country, where we become a more unified America, and we can live out the full realization of this as one of the greatest democracies on the face of the earth. America has that capability, and we're close to it. Democracy is not perfect, but the pursuit for freedom, justice, and equality is something you have to continue to work on. There was an old saying that I remember that went something like, freedom is not free, but we have to continue to work on it. And thankfully, I have lived long enough to see that we've gone a long way from the way it was, but there's still much to be done.
Excellent. Thank you both. Thank you both. And a great segue into the next question. It says, several significant milestones and/or events took place throughout the civil rights movement that began in the late 1940s and ended in the late 1960s. What would you consider to be the most significant event during the civil rights movement that resulted in the 1964 Civil Rights Act being passed? Now, before you answer that question, I'm going to give you a little review, because I don't want you to, we're going to start here in July of 1948. President Harry Truman issues the executive order 9981 to end segregation in the armed services. May 17, 1954, you mentioned Brown versus the Board of Education, consolidation of 5 cases into one. Was decided by the Supreme Court, effectively ending racial segregation in public schools. Then we have August 28, 1955. Emmett Till, a 14-year-old from Chicago, is brutally murdered in Mississippi for allegedly flirting with a white woman. His murderers are acquitted, and the case brings international attention to the civil rights movement after Jet magazine published a photo of Emmett Till. December the 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man on a Montgomery, Alabama bus. You have January 10th and 11th, 1957. 60 black pastors and civil rights leaders from several southern states, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., meeting in Atlanta, Georgia, to coordinate the nonviolent protests against racial discrimination and segregation. September 4th, 1957, 9 black students, known as the Little Rock Nine, are blocked from integrating into Little Rock Central High School. September 9th, 1957, Eisenhower signs the Civil Rights Act of 1957 into law to help protect voter rights. February the 1st, 1960, there are 4 African-American college students in Greensboro, North Carolina, refused to leave a Woolworth's white-only lunch counter without being served. November 14th, 1960, 6-year-old Ruby Bridges is escorted by armed federal marshals as she becomes the first student to integrate William Frantz Elementary School. 1961. Throughout the 1961 period, you have black and white activists known as Freedom Riders took bus trips throughout the American South to protest segregated bus terminals and attempt to use white-only restrooms and lunch counters. May the 2nd of 1963, more than 1,000 black school children marched throughout Birmingham, Alabama, in a demonstration against segregation. This is known as the Children's Crusade. And then June the 11th of 1963, George C. Wallace stands in the doorway at the University of Alabama to block 2 black students from registering. And in August the 28th of 1963, we have approximately 250,000 people take part in the March on Washington. And of course, this is where Dr. King gives the I Have a Dream speech. And on September the 15th of 1963, a bomb at 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, kills 4 young girls and injures several other people prior to Sunday service. There was a lot of events leading up, and just asking what was the most significant in your opinion?
In my opinion, it was a March on Washington, August 28, 1963. First of all, it was an initiative. It was a nonviolent mobilization. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the A. Philip Randolph Institute, the Urban League, Testament, the Urban League, the NAACP, many civil rights groups came together. And it was in the wake of the March on Washington that the formation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was actually done. The problem is that so much has been distorted about the March on Washington. It was certainly the I Have a Dream speech, but before Dr. King gave the I Have a Dream speech, young John Lewis, who was the head of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, spoke, and there was a dispute among the civil rights leaders whether or not to allow him to speak. Young people have always had the energy, the fearlessness to speak truth to power. And I think that coming here today, I flew all night from Las Vegas. I was at the NAACP convention. And the most amazing thing about that convention was so many thousands of young people from all over the United States who were hungry and thirsty for not only understanding the past, but how the past applies to today. And I agree with my colleague here that we've made enormous progress, but we still have a long ways to go. And I hope what Thurgood said about the 100 years comes true. But the only way it will happen by 2054 is that we got work to do in 2024. We got work to do. This election coming up, South Carolina should be a blue state. Why is it a red state? Because of low voter turnout. Why is there low voter turnout? Because of voter intimidation, voter suppression. We talk back in the room, people whisper. Whisper about freedom. Whisper about justice. Because they know if they raise their voice about it, it draws attention. And Dr. King, raising his eloquence. I remember in my home state, I was working for SCC. I was at the March on Washington. We had chartered buses from Trailway and Greyhound. And 3 days before the March on Washington, our bus contracts were canceled, even though they were paid for in advance. So, being an organizer, back in those days, because of segregation, school bus drivers took their buses back to their home. So, I don't know whether they had interstate driver license, but we got them school buses, and we went to the March on Washington. Dr. Chavis. I remember standing out in the crowd listening to Dr. King. And there was an old, well, it wasn't old, it was in college. There was a Jewish student named Joseph Lieberman, who later became Senator Lieberman. We were standing together listening to Dr. King. The reason why I bring this up because the relationship between blacks and Jews in America has been underestimated and underappreciated and underaffirmed. So, by the time Dr. King, you have to understand, when Mahalia Jackson sang, everybody was uplifted. A lot of speakers, Dorothy Height, you know, a lot of times we underestimate the role of women, the role of black men in the movement. It's very clear, we would not have had a civil rights movement if it wasn't for the sisters, black women. I remember Fannie Henry used to say, I'm sick or tired of being sick or tired. So, but I want to also just end this point. It was how the media covered the March on Washington. It was 250,000, probably a little bit more. But the mainstream media tried to say it was a little over 100,000. You know, well, that's a whole other story now. Million Man March. But the 63 March was a pivotal moment, not just because we gathered, but it's what we decided to do when we go back home. It's one thing to have a great camp meeting, It's what you do after the meeting. And there was an acceleration of the civil rights movement after the March on Washington. But there's also now an acceleration of the events to try to put fear in us. That's why they bombed, less than 2-3 weeks after the March on Washington.
That's correct.
The Klan puts a bomb on Sunday morning at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. Our 4 little sisters were killed instantly by the dynamite. So there's a price that has already been paid. And my thing is, I want us to learn from the past, not necessarily repeat it. I think we should glean those things that have been successful, expose those things that have not been successful. But what is it we do now? I'm not joining the pessimists. I'm optimistic. Because I believe that first, the God that put us on this earth has not turned his back on us.
Amen.
I think faith plays a part in the movement. I used to tell the brothers this all the time. Don't get involved in this movement if you don't believe in it. Don't get involved in this movement if you don't have faith. Because there will be trials and tribulations to test your faith. And this was the power of nonviolence, civil disobedience. And I still think today there needs to be a protracted multiracial movement. Keep in mind, the demographics in America have changed since 1963. We are much more racially diverse, ethnically diverse, linguistically diverse nation. And you would think by now, 2024, we'll be much further down Freedom's Road. The truth of the matter is, Trump only won in 2016 because Obama had been president 2008 to 2016. It was a reaction. And so, we know in the movement every time you make some progress, it's going to be a reaction. But that doesn't mean we give up because there's a reaction. Even today, there's a debate about whether or not we're going forward. How can we go forward? What can we learn? And the reason why I say the March on Washington, because it also brought together organized labor with the civil rights movement. And when it was time for us to go to all the various places and states, leading up to Dr. King's assassination in 1968, I would say that's the most tragic. Although I just want to point out in your chronology, before the March on Washington, Medgar Evers was assassinated in Mississippi.
That's correct.
He was a state field secretary.
That's correct.
I don't know if you've seen this documentary called Eyes on the Prize. Yeah. It's an 8-part series on PBS. And the thing about watching Eyes on the Prize, man, a lot of funerals, a lot of suffering, a lot of sacrifice. That's why, to me, the right to vote is sacred.
Amen.
And more of us understood how and what we had to do to get the right to vote, we would have a massive voter turnout in our community. And that's why this museum is so important. That's why this forum is so important. It's not so much to wallow in our suffering, but it's to remind us of our accountability and responsibility today. to make sure, going back to your first question, that we don't allow these forces to take us back.
Take it backwards. Amen.
Because I'm a few years older, yes, I have to speak from a different perspective, and I call to your attention a more authoritative source than I am myself personally. I call your attention to a motion picture done by Paramount and RKO called Separate But Equal, and which is based on the book by Richard Kluger called Simple Justice. Now, those two forms of information, a historical book that's, by the way, about 800 pages long, and that motion picture, which is about 3 hours long, they play on a daily basis in my museum in Orangeburg. And the reason they do is because I've always believed that in America, being first does really matter. And what I'm speaking about, I'm kind of sneaking in, of course, the Briggs versus Elliott petition in Clarendon County. And so my pick of the events that you mentioned was one that you mentioned. You mentioned Brown versus Board of Education, where I take an issue with credential historians, Harvard, Yale, and who I love to debate with. When you're debating with a person who is an eyewitness, it gets a little difficult because if you've written about something, once I went to Xenia, Ohio, I went to Exeter Academy in New Hampshire, I believe it is. And everyone at this little charter school, not little charter, but this school where presidents send their children, you have to be a valedictorian or salutatorian, and the level of intellect there. And a lady who produced Eyes on the Prize was also there by the name of Judy Johnson, and we oftentimes debated this. Judy Richardson, yes, you know her well.
I know her.
Yeah. And Eyes on the Prize was a great motion picture, but I have to take an issue with it. It missed something. It missed that South Carolina connection. And I speak from this perspective because, you see, I was an eyewitness and took the photographs for the people in this little town of Clarendon County, Summerton, South Carolina, who really only wanted better education for their children. And they filed a suit, which was the first in history to attack segregation in public education. And it was one of the 5 cases that make up Brown. But our credential historians, our most learned people, and even my Dr. Chavis's iPhone, and my iPhone, they miss something. There's something wrong with the chronology because, with all great respect to the Reverend Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and the people of Montgomery, Alabama, in reality, they started out by becoming very well known throughout the world by becoming known for integrating a bus transportation system of Montgomery, Alabama. But the Briggs versus Elliott case liberated America and helped to define the 14th Amendment in the Constitution. They can't kill it. So that's why I say Brown versus Board of Education was the real meat in the matter. It was that case. For a year and a half, the Briggs versus Elliott case was the only case working its way up to the Supreme Court. Right here in Charleston, where I photographed Thurgood Marshall getting off the train to start that case at the same train station you have today. a forerunner to the social media. I was there, I photographed it, and I watched that case come out. But the people of Clarendon County met head on the reality of Brown versus Board of Education, because Jimmy Burns, the governor of South Carolina, was the one that again kept that case from really being the lead case. It became Brown because of the middle of the United States case, the people of Kansas. The Brown case was the fourth of the 5 cases chronologically. And so Brown was that case. And so the greatness of museums like this, which tell the entire story of our 400 years as a people coming to this country, and the great magnificence, the reason that it is needed, a museum like this is needed, because it tells the story. And that is impressionable to the youth, because it helps to develop values in our young minds. And so we can't take the history out of the books out of our schools, and we can't not tell the history. And just as Dr. Chavis said, this is American history. And so as I listen to some fanatics, come up with ideas to do that, it's not going to work. It will fall short. I promise you. I've lived long enough to know when something like that is kind of gets a half a win, it's going to fail. But it's not going to take a decade for it to fail. It's going to fail because again, there's always more good people than there are bad people. But that's why I again say Brown versus Board of Education was the most significant.
Yeah, and thank you both for your answers.
Can I just amplify what you said just for 10 seconds? At the NAACP meeting I just left for Vegas, the Briggs family was there.
Yes.
And a lot of the young people didn't know who they were. Because it's not in the books, the school books. I'm talking about South Carolina school books. So what you have said is, I agree. That's why we have to not only take our own pictures, write our own books, distribute our own news service, not in isolation. It's just to make sure that the narrative doesn't get twisted or distorted. Last point, as great as the Brown decision was, it stands in jeopardy now. We have a Supreme Court that is not only moving against DEI, we have a Supreme Court that's not only moving against women, we have a Supreme Court that is saying no preference stands constitutional scrutiny. And therefore, unfortunately, you have to pray for the brother. Clarence Thomas has already uttered that he thinks that Brown should be overturned. Now, this is not a debate. The reason why I said the March on Washington, because no court can overturn that. If we're not careful, and that's why elections have consequences. Whoever's the next president is going to put more people on the Supreme Court. And thank God, Ketanji Brown Jackson is there. But she's almost the lone African American on the court. So I think that we have to make sure that we go out and vote to protect that landmark decision. Briggs and other cases that led up to Brown versus the board. Last night, we're talking about these learned historians, degree historians. The NAACP gave its highest award to Professor Skip Gates from Harvard, great brother filmmaker, as well as a scholar. he was introduced by Leon Hickenbottom's wife, who was also a distinguished historian. And Mrs. Hickenbottom, or Professor Hickenbottom, made reference in introducing Skip Gates of a letter that her husband, a distinguished judge, Leon Hickenbottom, wrote to Clarence Thomas after he was on the Supreme Court, reminding Clarence Thomas that he didn't get there on his own volition. You know, a door was opened for him by the movement. And Judge Hickenbottom was trying to remind brother that you have a responsibility. You know, not to, well, I'm not going to get into it all, but I just think that history does have a way of, not necessarily repeating itself, but history has a way of giving us reminders of how important the ongoing civil. See, I disagree with anybody that says post-civil rights. Post-civil rights means we got all the civil rights. It's not post-civil rights. We got work to do. You know, and I think that the young people today, I'm very, so once the young people found out who the Briggs family were, they were like surrounded because they wanted to hear the story of Briggs. Sure. And that's our responsibility. If we don't write books about Briggs, if we don't deposit that history, it will get lost. You know, and people may think that there was only one case at the Supreme Court level. But I think we have to work hard to protect democracy. When W.E.B. Du Bois wrote this book, The Soul of Black Folk, The Soul of Black People, he wasn't just talking about the soul of a racial group. It's the soul of America. And I think that we have an obligation to our ancestors. The Lord knows every time I come to Charleston, I mean, the location of this museum should remind all of us of the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of our ancestors who came through this port. More came through this port in North America than anywhere else. So, this should be the place of liberation. This should be the place of mobilization. This should be the place of raising education for everybody. Because I'm fearful of these little white students. They're going to get an inadequate education. So you not only injure black students, you injure white students when you don't tell the truth. And I think that a lot of the things that are wrong in our society, there's one word: ignorance. And you overcome ignorance by education. That's why the Brown system was so pivotal. Because the only way you're going to have equality is that you have to rid the system of the inequalities that are based on ignorance. I teach a course there at Duke University. Got 90 students. I shocked them. Because I said, how many of y'all believe in genetics? How many of y'all believe in anthropology? Well, if that's the case, then we're all Africans over here. Craig said, it's one humanity. So we're all part of one human family. It's just not what Rodney King said, can we all get along? No. We need to all work together toward perfecting the union, a more perfect union. We have to all work together to make sure there are no more George Floyds, to make sure there are no more people who get victimized, get hurt, get injured just because of the color of their skin. I know a lot of parents, I put my age up at work driving at 14, but I know a lot of parents today, they don't want their children to get driver's license for fear of what may happen. Fear they may get pulled off, may lose their life. Not because they were doing something wrong, but the circumstances. Hate, racism, anti-Semitism, all these things are on the rise. What is the antidote to it? Meetings like this, gatherings, mobilizing, working together. I disagree with the polls. These polls, that's another problem. These educated polls, I don't know who they're talking to. And so we're working at Howard University right now to establish our own national polling center. Because we know that these polls that keep everybody, they talk about on social media and network television are not necessarily accurate. And if something is not accurate, it contributes to the widespread ignorance that hovers over our society. I'm sorry, I said 10 seconds.
Just remind, I don't have to remind the audience, these two iconic men, and having the opportunity to listen in the discussion we're having. We want to thank you. I mean, right here and now, before we even go any further. And in the way you talk about us having the opportunity to tell our stories, because if we don't tell our stories, somebody's going to steal it and tell it in a different way. And we segue right into Mr. Williams. You opened the Cecil Williams, South Carolina Civil Rights Museum, which features hundreds of artifacts from the Civil Rights Movement. And you both touched on it already. But the question is, what are some of the activities museums may do in support of the Civil Rights Act of 1964? And you are already right there in some of the things in the actions. So remind us again.
In my last mention, I did say that, again, it's because museums have a way of, again, educating through exhibits, through displays, through artifacts. We learn to tell stories, and we learn to share this information and this educational material. And it is especially, as Dr. Chavis said, to young minds. You see, it helps the history that and the legacy and the heritage that a museum like this helps with the visitors, the people that come here, and people that learn from things that are going on here. And my museum, in Orangeburg, which is a very tiny museum today. We have my wife, my sister, and I. After 30 years of trying to start a civil rights museum or get one started, we tried to get the state, we tried to everybody. I was a member of a very elite organization, which I won't mention the name of. I tried to get them to do it. We couldn't find anyone. But I had a lot of artifacts, photographs, and documents, and we put $60,000 together, and we started a museum. I really believe that again, I'm going to give all the credit to another, you might say, court of opinion, another justice, and another supreme entity, and that is our supreme God that weaves away in a journey through life and helps things to move along despite temporary setbacks. I really believe that I was destined to be a photographer of South Carolina's civil rights movement activities and take photographs, and exclusively just for South Carolina. I couldn't go too much out of the state because I started working with Jet before I even had my driver's license, which is 14. So I exclusively covered that. But again, we learn so much from museums, and its importance is a lot of times lost. But the state of South Carolina and Florida, out of the 16 southern states of the United States, who, again, from Plessy versus Ferguson to 1954, found it easy to get away with segregating human beings according to the complexion, the pigment of their skin. Again, that was all destroyed by the Supreme Court. in 1954 with Brown versus Board of Education, which ruled that segregation in public education is unconstitutional. So if we don't have facilities like this, it would be such a loss to humanity because it is on the shoulders of so many people that we stand today, that the progress that we have made. And we've got to insist that this continue because, again, it's so meaningful. In fact, I'm not an educator per se. I'm not teaching anywhere. But in my opinion, our entire educational focus nationwide, they've got it upside down and backwards. Instead of, as Dr. Chavis said, if they know what is anthropology, if you would just teach that, and if our young children's minds could just have a core understand the fact that you understand that and know that a continent that happens to be called Africa is where mankind originated, and it's only and there's only one race, and we're all only separated by the amount of pigment we have in our skin. It's just so simple. That ought to be the focus of education, rather than A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's important because you got to learn how to count, to go to the grocery store, and do anything in life. But it's still at a very early age, if we taught these things in sciences, that it's such a simple thing that we're all one kind. I think the astronauts do it better, and I'll settle by saying that. The astronauts do it better than anyone. Many of the astronauts who have, say, left the surface of the Earth and traveled into outer space have this same kind of realization, and I've read their stories. They say as they look back as that little round ball in the sky, in a black sky, that's just out there, just some kind of way suspended in air. Almost an impossible kind of thing. Levitation. It is the epitome of levitation. A globe weighing billions and billions of it just floating around in space. But when they look back at that globe, the water planet, Earth, they realize that on this planet is one race of human beings, and that's the human race. When all of us understand that, I think we can settle everything. All bets are off on anything else. But when you understand that, when educators get that down and can teach that, I think a lot of our problems will disappear.
Yes, I just want to say amen. We just heard the truth of the gospel, the oneness of our humanity. There's only one race, the human race. Now, in certain parts of our nation today, to make that statement may get you roughed up, because we're so used to being separate, pointing fingers at one another, making stereotypes about one another. Part of the ethos of the civil rights movement of the 1960s was, we're going to rise above this hatred. We're going to rise above. When we sing, we shall overcome, we were not overcome when we sang that song. We sing that song fervently because we know that if we keep struggling, one day we will overcome. So I went to some people a little younger than me. They said, well, Dr. Chavis, we're tired of marching. I said, you ain't never marched. How you tired of marching? How you tired of something you haven't in practice? But I'm going to answer your question. Not to say amen to my brother. That once upon a time we had an oral tradition of our history, passed on from generation to generation. The Gullah Geechee, it's an oral tradition passed on, particularly in this part of the Lord's earth. And a great degree, informed how we communicate. How do we believe the picture that we see? Do we believe the song that we hear? Now, some of you know I got involved in hip hop very early. A lot of my colleagues in the civil rights movement was trying to tamp and stop hip hop from emerging. But I reminded some of my colleagues that, look, when we were young, we had poets, we had artists, we had photographers that inspired. I wish we had Jet magazine today. I wish we had Ebony magazine today. Because those two magazines fill the void. Where I'm from, North Carolina, if you don't have a stack of Jet magazines on your dining room table, and people will question where you're from. But the point I want to make, fast forward, I think there should be greater embrace of museums like the IAAM and other museums. But I'm just going to be truthful. When I was out in Vegas with thousands of young people, they don't know me from the civil rights movement. They don't know me from the Wilmington 10. They don't know me from the NAACP. They don't know me from the National Council of Churches. They know me from the movie Bennett. Now, some of y'all don't know what that means. But we live now in the audiovisual age. Something on every hip hop. It's not just what people hear. It's not just what people see. It's what people feel. So in a lot of hoods, young brothers will say, feel me? You feel me? And so we have to take these truths, these universal truths, and make sure that we're using art forms also today, using technology today, to make people feel the truth. That's what I was able to do. I'm not an actor, but Hype Williams asked me to play this role at the end of the movie. It's an R-rated movie. It's kind of a lot of stuff going on before the end. But we were able to transmit a message. Now when I go to a lot of South Central Los Angeles or South Side of Chicago, or probably a hood here in Charleston, the young brothers and sisters say, hey man, you're the man from Bennett. Why? Because that's what young people today, if it's not on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, etc., it informs whether or not it is real, whether or not they can be able to feel it. So I think we need to repackage Eyes on the Prize so that it gets to our next generation. Last point, and I said this when I spoke to the university a couple of days ago, don't discount elders. Don't discount it, because now we got this thing going on in America where people say you don't even count after you reach a certain age. Even the Bible says wisdom comes from the elders. So don't turn against brothers and sisters because of their age. They may have something to offer to help, because all of us will get old one day. You know, and I think that the movement should be intergenerational, where we work, and one of the things I like about this museum is interactive. Tonight's thing has been live streamed. So thousands of people who are not in this room are able to hear and see, and I hope they're able to feel what we're saying.
Amen. As we're going through, and I know when we got started, we said we had a lot to unpack, but Our time is getting a little limited here at this point, and discussing all things and opportunities about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But I have one last question, and we're going to do that one quickly as we go through. And I may just mention here, let's go at Project 25 that was here, but we're not going to be able to get to at that point. But we do know.
Ask that.
Say again?
Ask that.
Ask that one?
Yes, sir. Ask that.
Okay, I'm going to roll in the boat. Well, the Project 25 certainly was about the reorganization and the refocus. It appears to be with the Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division. And that's going to have an impact. And I don't want to be as bold as say going away. But your reaction to some of the things that certainly have been a part of what's introduced in the Project 25 document as applies to the Civil Rights Act. Just some comments in that regard.
I'm gonna let my elder go first.
And it was a long document. Last I checked, 900 pages.
I'd have to readily admit I'm not even familiar with that. But
Okay.
my comment that I really wanted to make was as something she mentioned that music and other forms of media are so very important. I am not actually known for the photography I took of the civil rights and the briefs petition in Clarendon County. I'm mostly known and recognized for a picture that a friend of mine took while I was drinking out of a white only water fountain. And that caught on in the media. And you're right that sometimes, again, a miracle like cell phones are and the mass media we play a part of. But guess what? It brings thousands of young people to our museum, because when they come to my museum, I have a water fountain set up just like the water fountain that I took a picture of. So that, for that matter, it does again have an educational value.
Amen.
Well, Project 2025 emerged from the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation is a multi-billion-dollar nonprofit in Washington, D.C. They hire a bunch of these learned scholars. And so the 900 pages wasn't written overnight. They've been working on this. They felt that during Trump's first 4 years, 2016, 2020, he dropped the ball because he wasn't ready. He got elected, but they didn't have their people in place. So the first thing about Project 2025 you have to know, it is a preparatory document. It is preparing for the return of Trump. Now he's trying to disassociate himself, but of the 120 people that wrote the document, 9 of them worked for Donald Trump or in his cabinet. So it's calling for the elimination of the Department of Education. And ain't we been just talking about education? I said, but you know what I'm saying? They're going to wipe out the Department of Education. They want to make it a federal law that women do not make decisions about control of their bodies. They want to reestablish the draft only in public schools. Come on now. I don't know if some of y'all know what the draft was. Well, I went to high school. 50% of all the brothers in my high school graduating class were drafted, went to Vietnam. I lost 30% of all the black males in my high school class died in Vietnam. Drafted. Some even drafted out of school, out of college, because they could hold on to their 2S deferment. Listen, my father was a veteran in World War I, so I'm not against veterans. And I thank all the military for their service. My point is, Project 2025 is a manifesto to take America backwards. It's not about making America great again. It's about making America white again. About making America hate-filled again. By making America separate again. By making America, they even want to come, they didn't even want the United States to do anything in the world. They want to withdraw. You know, they're not going to defend Ukraine. And you saw, as soon as Trump named J.D. Vance as the vice president, the first accolade came from Putin and the Kremlin. So that's great. So what I'm saying is, we're living in a pivotal moment. But something my brother said, look, we can't stop praying, and God is not going to stop answering our prayers. But one of the things I learned as a young person growing up in the movement, sometimes God answers our prayers through what we do in light of our faith. And so I'm hoping that in this county, across this state, across our nation, that come November, there'll be a great camp meeting at the voting booths. Now I know in Georgia they want to put you in jail for giving a bottle of water. You know what I'm doing? I'm going to jail. I'm going to give out some water bottles. Lock me up. Nonviolent civil disobedience. Don't let nobody tell you that freedom is not worth standing up for. That freedom is not worth voting for. And Project 2025, we have to act in 2024 to prevent Project 2025. Because it's going on.
I'm going to stand for this, but it is my sincere hope and my prayer that we're going to have a version 2, and we can have these two iconic men come back again for further discussion. There's a lot more in this book that we want to cover, but I really, on behalf of the International African American Museum and all that are gathered here, want to thank you both so much for just sharing some of those moments with us. God bless you both.
If you have a question, if you could come here to the middle, that way you can speak in the mic. Mr. Parker, do you have a question? All right, if you come forward.
First and foremost, thank you so much for blessing us with your presence, your talents, all your gifts. The question I have, you talk about Project 2025. There are so many people even here who are not aware of Project 2025. Most impactful people will be Black and brown people. How and what will the NAACP do and all the other organizations to make sure that we get the information so we can get without question?
Yes, one is if you Google Project 2025, it pops right up. All 900 pages. So it's really accessible online. You know, it's interesting. The Heritage Foundation, they're not trying to hide it. They're very proud of the document. So it's been printed. There's a print copy. But that costs. I wouldn't give the Heritage Foundation any money for it. So it's an online edition. Secondly, I'm glad you asked. NAACP is alerted there are two 3,400 branches of the NAACP across the United States. So all of the branches have been given directive as a result of the convention to make this our top priority in mobilizing to get out the vote. You're right. A lot of people don't even know what Project 2025 is. They've heard about it. And to show you how diabolic on a lot of the social media channels, they have a lot of young people thinking that Project 2025 is cool. You know? Y'all pray for 50 Cent. Brother needs help. You know, pray for Kanye West. Lord knows he needs help. So I think that we should talk about this at the dinner table, at the breakfast table. We should talk about this at Sunday school. You know, preachers should preach about this. I mean, take the text from the Bible, but apply it. What does the Lord have to say about Project 2025? And then lastly, I think we have to work hard to make sure that we don't contribute to the hopelessness. The reason why we're bringing to your awareness Project 25 is not to scare you, but it is to inspire you to want to help do something. Because I really believe, I agree with you, there are more righteous people in America than evil people. That's true. But see, the righteous can't afford to be silent. The righteous can't afford to be we got to raise our voices, you know, together. You know, I mean, wouldn't it be a great thing, election day? You know, because my days in the civil rights movement, we had these big challenges. We're not going to give out one bottle of water, we're going to get a big truck and just let people get their own water. Because the law says you cannot give it. It did not say you cannot provide it. So part of the movement is we have to learn the rules better than the rule makers. You know, there's a will, where there's a will, there's a way. And the more I think about it, given some of those historic photos that you've taken, voting rights, we need to create these little clips of how the past applies to today. And ask young people to join in. They will join. I was at the Jenkins office earlier today. I heard some 11-year-old, 12-year-old, and 13-year-olds read like they were in college. That's very encouraging. Do you know in New York, the kids that don't pass the 3rd grade reading test in New York State, that statistic is used to determine how many juvenile prisons are going to be built. Now you would think that you use those statistics to reinvest 1 through 3 to make sure everybody reads at the grade level. So that's the kind of state our society is in, you know. But you know, and so I'm always concerned that those of us who are elders, that we don't miss an opportunity to inspire somebody, to open the door. I would not have been in the movement, Dr. King and Floyd McKisson and Anthony Young, they opened the door for me to join. And I joined. I became a better student in school because I was an activist. You know? And I think our young people today want that information. But it's how we give it to them so they're not fearful, but give it to them in a way that inspires, motivates, and most of all, encourages our young people. There's so much out in this world that discourages our young people. You know, we have to be in the encouragement, movement building business.
If I I could give a quick follow-up to that statement, and I heard you say, Dr. Chavis, you all enjoyed giving challenges to one another. So I'd like to challenge everyone in this room before you leave tonight, if they are still going to be here, please visit the League of Women Voters in the back. I trust that everyone here may be registered to vote, but I'm sure that you know someone that is not. And if you do, please grab their information so that we can follow along with what you've said and make certain that the information gets respectively to where it needs to go. Another question?
Hi, my name is Ivana Lady Gibson. Just to let you know, I fight for justice and my family is supporting me. And that's my cousin.
Anyone else? You running for politics? Anyone else? Any final closing remarks from the panelists?
No, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. This is an ongoing discussion, an ongoing dialogue. I get inspired by, I'm watching your faces. You know, I'm watching your, not just reaction, but your engagement. So I leave Charleston tonight more hopeful than when I arrived because of your vote.
Thank you both very earnestly and sincerely for being here. You three.
Well, we had a great moderator.
Yes, still a moderator. Thank you all for coming as well.
I will be in stay around.
We came to your